Hello and welcome to On the Ledge episode 303, the fourth in my Late Night OTL series and the last episode before the show takes a break. I know, devastating, but we've got a great episode this week. I'm so glad to be talking to the inspirational content creator and terrarium maker extraordinaire, Ben Newell of Worcester Terrariums. We'll be finding out what makes Ben tick, how he garnered an incredible 2 million plus followers on social media, and exactly how you make a terrarium from a bottle of soy sauce. Before we get going, a quick reminder, this is a late night on the ledge episode. So think of a late night chat show format, so expect some bad language, some off-topic conversations away from our usual indoor gardening theme, and topics that might not be suitable for younger ears. Right, that said, let's get into our chat. Ben, welcome to the show. I can't believe it's taken me 300 episodes to get you on the ledge. That is very wrong, but welcome. Glad to have you here. I have to say I'm a little bit nervous to interview you because I kind of dismissed terrariums in the Late Night on the Ledge episode with Sarah and T.
Okay.
I was sort of talking about how I admire them and appreciate the work that goes into them, but they're not something that's part of my planty repertoire at the moment, if I can put it that way. But I do love looking at your work. Now, you produce all these beautiful terrariums and they're works of art, but they're also really functional too, and your attention to detail is incredible. And you're also really generous in sharing the stuff that you know via your social media and also through your new book, Hello Tiny World, which is amazing. So let's get into it. We want to talk about how this all began. Now, I know you've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I'd really like to sort of go back to where your love of plants began, and it wasn't really with terrariums, was it?
No, certainly not. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's surreal for me to be on here because I've listened to your podcast for a long time.
Sorry about, you're probably sick of my voice.
No, it's good. You have a nice voice, it's fine. So yeah, I didn't grow up with horticulture. I probably say this too much, but my only experience really was putting a bean into a plastic cup, putting it on my year 2 windowsill, and then I didn't come back to it until I was 21, 22 years old.
By that time.
Yeah, right. So I went through a difficult period in my life. I lost my dad when I was 8, and then my brother when I was 13. Completely failed school. Like, I left school with 4 GCSEs, but I should have got 3. My RE teacher definitely lied about some coursework I handed in, and I got involved with a lot of bad things. I was using drugs, drinking every day, which at 16 years old is, no 16-year-old should be doing that. And it was an especially dark time, which lasted a really long time. So when I think about that time period, really, it started when I was about 13, and it didn't end until I was 23.
But you must have been holding on to an incredible amount of grief and...
Yeah, and it came out when I left school. All my friends went off to college. The thing that really sticks in my mind was how anxious I was. I really struggled to be around new people. Like, so much so I would feel physically sick and sometimes be sick. And that really stayed with me until I got this job at a school, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But yeah, those were some really, really dark times, and I've never really elaborated on them only to people who are close to me. But I think discovering horticulture was definitely one of the key components to pulling me out of that. So when I got this job, I got a job at primary school. And I was working one-to-one with a 3-year-old child. And it started out as half an hour a day. I would go in and we just hang out for half an hour because he was a lovely little boy, but he found it difficult to be in class. And that progressed to 1 hour to 3 hours, and then I was with him all day. And it was also at this time where I did discover horticulture, because as part of his daily routine, he had to take the compost bin out from the reception classroom to the compost bin, and he hated doing it. every day was a struggle. He would kick and scream and throw the compost bin and just really didn't want to do that. But I became very interested in composting. It was because they had a compost bin, and then they had another one which was like a year old, and it had the most amazing compost in it. And I became very interested in this process. And right next door to the school I was working at was an allotment site. So I put my name down and eventually got a 16th of an acre plot of land, which I had no idea what to do with. I cleared the land with a friend of mine who then decided he wanted to hop on and help me. And yeah, having this patch of land to care for was instrumental in helping me leave behind that damaging life I was living, along with a few other things. And I often think, I may even have said this in my book about what would have happened had I not taken on that allotment, because from here is where I truly discovered my love for plants. And ended up here today on the James Rome podcast.
I mean, what message would you kind of say, if you could sort of send a message back in time to your 13, 14-year-old self, what would you kind of say? Because I think it's hard when you're that age. Everything seems like it's going to be forever, and of course it isn't. But what would you have what would you wish you'd have known then that you know now?
Nothing is as scary as it seems. I think that's the one thing I would tell 13-year-old Ben, is that you just have to give things a go and don't run away from things. But in another way, I'm glad I went through what I went through, because I am where I am today. So yeah, I think not being scared and trying things is really important. And not having my dad and my brother around probably made things difficult, but I have to say I was very fortunate. My mother and my sister were extremely supportive and stuck with me through all of the terrible times. So, on one hand, yes, I was dealt a difficult hand, but on the other side of that, I was also very fortunate.
I'm really glad to hear that composting was key here, because, long-term listeners will know this is also my passion. And I do have this, I'm sure this draws into a lot of what you do with terrariums too, like the process of decomposition. If we can understand that, I think it starts to help you get a perspective on the world if you understand how things rot. That sounds kind of a strange thing to say, but
it's fascinating as well, and like the role of detritivores, like within a terrarium, but also within our own world, is people don't really think about this, and I think it's a really, really fascinating topic, and something that I learned much more about through terrarium making.
yeah, because you obviously will get onto the creatures that you feature in your work, and meeting some of those. Now you are amazing at teaching people about terrariums. You do it in person in workshops, you do it in your videos, and also in your book. I mean, you must get so many questions with such a big following. I imagine that you're answering the same things over and over again. Is there one thing that people are always asking you, and what's the question that should be coming up that isn't?
I think aside from why is my terrarium dying, and usually that's either not enough light or too much water,
Yeah.
or bad soil. People ask a lot about mosses and what kind of mosses they can use. Why has my moss gone brown? And I think, to answer that, like you can't just go onto your roof and take moss and use that in your terrarium. These mosses require quite specific conditions. And to just think, oh, it's a humidity-loving plant, we're just going to shove it into a terrarium and it's going to work, is wrong. So I think I like to encourage people to use aquatic mosses because they grow fast, easy to propagate, and they're not taken from the wild, which I think is a big thing. Questions people should be asking. I did think about this when I read the questions. Not necessarily questions. I think people should really take in their mind that these aren't permanent. Like, I really want to get this across. Terrariums aren't permanent. Much in the same way you would repot a house plant, you would prune a house plant. It's exactly the same with a terrarium. So I would encourage people to to keep in their minds that nothing is permanent and that we can change and redo them. And that's where a lot of the joy comes with terrarium making, at least for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they will last some time. I mean, what's your lifespan of a typical terrarium before you need to get in there and do any major work? Well, how long?
It really depends on the plants that you use. So the one behind you, which I brought with me on the train, that is nearing 5 years old, and it's gone through so many changes. I think I put a peperomia pepper spot in there, Oakley fig, and a small Perosia fern, which I took out. But it's nearly 5 years old, and I've done, other than water it a few times, I've done pretty much nothing. On the flip side to that, there are terrariums, like, I don't know, there's a tiny one down there. It's only a few months old. Plants are starting to fill it. Now would be a good time to take everything out, maybe use those plants elsewhere. There's no real time scale. Each one is individual, and I'd probably encourage people maybe to use plants that are a little slower growing, smaller leaved, so that, you know, maybe you can enjoy it for longer. But going back to that nothing is permanent thing, I think is something I always keep in my mind.
You must wince though when you go online and see some of the terrariums people are making with, like, I always think asparagus fern. Like, why would you put an asparagus fern?
Yeah,
I mean, obviously you can, but
Yeah.
presumably, knowing asparagus fern's growth rate, that's going to be quite a limited
Yeah, I mean,
time span. Oh, you got one in there. Oh, look, but how long's that been in there?
3 years.
Oh, what, really?
Yeah. So, I mean,
Maybe that's blown my idea out of the water. I always
do you
thought
know-
they'd get, maybe in there it's dwarfed. It's kind of like,
I actually have no idea. I agree with you. It's not something, a plant I would use that much anymore. And also, I noticed that it died back at one point.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. And like there are certain plants that grow very quickly. I think if you do use those plants, just understand that in a few months' time, you're going to have to, you know, get in there, do some pruning, or more than likely replace the plants entirely.
yeah.
But yeah, there's such a wide breadth of plants that we can use. Some of them are very expensive. But I think, you know, with the methods that we can use to plant a terrarium, plants can go a really long way. Like using cuttings, you can take, you know, a single Photonia plant and actually make lots of terrariums with this single plant. If you're like me, I don't buy plants very often, you know. I have so many terrariums at home and in my studio that I will just take cuttings from them and use them in other terrariums, give them away. I think that's a big, like, I love that. I love giving people new plants. It's such a fun thing to do. I also love receiving new plants too.
Yeah, no, that's a great message. And I guess it's just a question of experimentation. You know, something that might work for somebody might not work for somebody else in a slightly different setting, different soil, and so on. You know, I guess that's where it comes in. It makes me slightly, I think the one thing that I think there probably is a red line about is using succulents in closed terrariums. Is that,
Yeah.
I mean,
I agree with you, but you know, even with that, on my Facebook group, someone had shared, you know, oh, I put a succulent in a closed terrarium and look how well it's doing.
yeah,
I wouldn't
exactly.
encourage anyone to do that because, you know, we know that's bad practice. But yeah, this person I can't actually remember what it was, but the succulent they used had grown thick white roots and seemed like it was loving life in there. But, you know, more often than not, you'd be wasting your money if you bought a cacti and put it into a closed terrarium.
Yeah, I mean, as an OG listener, you might remember when I had somebody on the show who had a cactus that was really many, many years old that was growing in a glass jar. And it was just like one of these things where you go, how is that working? How is that
Yeah.
possible? But somehow it's succeeding.
And also, I think with, you know, cacti and succulents, I wouldn't really consider them terrariums, but you know, people call them open terrariums, these desert plantings, those arid region style plantings, which, you know, that's how you would do it if you wanted to make an open terrarium. But yeah, certainly don't put an arid region plant into a closed terrarium where it's very humid.
Yes, there's a lot of mush that results from that kind of activity. You do use an amazing range of different vessels for your terrariums. I mean, this is why I guess you've got so many followers, because you're always coming up with these incredible ideas. I mean, ones that sort of sprang into my mind were the Tic Tac container, the little sweet container terrarium, so tiny, a soy sauce bottle, gumball machine. I mean, there was a terrarium with a waterfall in it. I just like I'm overawed by your ability. So how do you? This is your job. This is what you do for a living now. In the last, is it? How long have you been completely?
18 months
So
full time.
how are you coming up with ideas and where are you getting your inspiration from?
I think I watch other creators online. So the TikTok wasn't my idea.
Right.
That was another creator. I think for me, like first and foremost, it's important for me to be in a happy place. I produce my best work when I'm happy. So I think taking care of myself in that way is really important. I like to exercise, eat well, and yeah, that is very important to me. In terms of like finding inspiration, there are some creators online who are doing some incredible things, especially on YouTube, also on Instagram and TikTok and short form platforms. There's a lot of people making amazing work in the terrarium, vivarium space where they introduce aquatic elements, aquatic animals, reptiles and amphibians. It's a growing space which is full of highly creative people. Having said that, once you get into making terrariums, like there is, if it's clear, if the container is clear and it can be sealed off, like it has the capacity to be a terrarium, it might not be for very long, but you can create something quite sweet. I think it's a great project with your children. To create a small terrarium in an everyday object. So, like you say, the soy sauce bottle. I was watching a friend of mine use soy sauce at the studio, and I thought, don't throw that bottle away. I want to make a terrarium out of it. It might not last, 5 years like the terrarium behind you, but if I get 6 months out of it and then I can reuse those plants somewhere else, then happy days. That's great. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just watch people online, go outdoors a lot. This ties back into being happy. I don't get to do that as much as I'd like to, living in London now.
Do you get any good ideas from people who've watched your videos and says, try this next, try some other weird vessel? Have you had any good follower ideas?
I think certainly with naming animals I have.
Okay.
I'll always ask people about that. There's some hilarious ones. Someone actually pointed me on to those sort of bell jars. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to engage with the audience and see what ideas they have. Someone had a certain brand of saffron that was sold in Sainsbury's and sent me a photo. So I very swiftly went and brought this saffron and then turned that into a small terrarium. So yeah, I've certainly taken some ideas from the audience.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the terrariums you've got here.
Yeah.
We've already mentioned the one with the asparagus fern in it. Is that some kind of little creeping ficus you've got in there as well?
I believe it's Ficus Columbia. That's what I bought it as. I think it has a few different names. It's completely taken over, as you can see.
It has.
And there is Ficus punctata in there, or Ficus panama, it's known as. I'm sure there's a Margravia creeping in there somewhere. That terrarium that's got the most views on social media for me, because I would feed the bugs like cucumbers and apples. And it needs a trim, but I almost quite like just how wild it is. I think with the terrariums on the table, so this is the sort of thing I make more of now, is the smaller stuff. So this one, it's got a little dinosaur in it who's fallen over. There was some Syningia muscicola in there, which didn't do so well. But this just is Lycobrium glaucum moss. And from a H&M sort of flower vase. And to me, that's something you can create for next to nothing. And my friend 3D printed the dinosaur. So I think that's a really fun, a fun thing for children, is being able to add their own figurines in there. So yeah, with the Syningia and the Lycobrium glaucum. And I think this would actually last quite a long time without too much intervention. I leave the top off as well, just for some airflow. But my favourite, I've got 3 of my favourites. 4 actually, because I think there's one behind me. So starting with this one, I'm being mindful to try and stay in front of the microphone. So this one's Specklinia dressleri, which is growing on the tree fern. I made the mistake of covering it in this moss mix, which is milled sphagnum with fern spore and moss spore in it, because the ferns have germinated and I had to trim it back yesterday because I didn't want you to see how overgrown it had gotten. So yeah, I'm having to sort of pull those out.
Yeah.
As and when. But the moss, a really interesting story about this moss. So this is Perobrium dosianum, which I think is native to China. So someone came to a workshop that I did and brought me a clump of this. And I'd seen that they use it a lot over, like there's a few Singaporean content creators and people in Malaysia who use this moss. And I think it looks amazing. But she had just taken it on a flight, which I don't think you're meant to do. You're not meant to take plants on a flight. And said, I brought you a present. So I'm not sure how many people have this moss in this country, but that small clump I got from her has turned into, I've got quite a bit of it now, because all I do is take off little bits like this and then use them elsewhere. So that's one of my favourite terrariums with that tiny Specklinia orchid. You're more than welcome to have a cutting from there if you like.
Mosses are amazing. Have you read the book on moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer?
Yeah,
That's a really,
it is great.
Great. I mean, as a moss enthusiast, that's the book that really, well, for me, just opened up my mind to the world of mosses. Just amazing stuff.
And I think that book is, everyone should read that book. So I made a smaller version of that terrarium in here with a tiny division of the Specklinia dressleri, and then the moss, again, just taking the ends off essentially to keep it small and then using them elsewhere. So yeah, I really like to think of them as like little propagation chambers. Some of them last a long time, some of them don't, but little propagation chambers, that's how I view a terrarium.
And where do you get your glassware from? Are you the person who's always looking out for like unusual vessels to use?
Yeah, so the vast majority of glassware sold for use as a terrarium isn't very nice. It's very generic, mass produced. I keep an eye on Amazon, eBay, flea markets if I ever have the chance to go. There was a huge one in Worcester, in Malvern, which is right next to Worcester, where you could get some incredible vessels from there at a good price too. But it can be quite a challenge to find nice terrarium glassware. But I'd always encourage people to be creative with online searches. Don't just put terrarium glassware and buy something, because it's really generic stuff. But yeah, just being creative with it. Old lab glassware, anything really. I really like acrylic boxes because they're so multifunctional, and again, very cheap online. Each one works out at like £5 or something, and I think they look infinitely better than the mass-produced glassware that's made for terrariums. Not all of it, of course, but most of it.
Yeah, exactly. I love that kind of finding something that nobody else has got or that just looks unusual. That is part of the enjoyment. And a bit of a geeky sort of practical question here. Keeping glass clean, as somebody who lives in a hard water area, any like hacks on that? Because that's the one thing when I've made terrariums in the past, or things that have got water in them and glass, I'm left with this cloudy look, which is not great.
No. And to be honest, I've not cleaned a lot of this glassware. Yes, so I think first thing is to stay on top of it. Don't let it build up to a point where it's, you have to really scrub it off. Using good quality water. So because I have a lot of vivariums at home with animals inside, I do use distilled water for the misting system so they don't clog up. if you use that in the terrariums, then that's great because it doesn't build up on the glass. Our shower, like even, we clean it frequently, but the hard water in London, it's terrible, and it's not great for the glass and your terrarium plants. So I think staying on top of it, and if you can use good quality water, even just using filtered water or bottled water, it's not like we're watering houseplants with this water where you would use lots and lots of it. Some of these terrariums are watered once a year, so it's a small amount of water.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's about the scale of it. But yeah, that's a good tip. And I think if you do have a situation where you've got something that is crusted, what do you do then? Is there anything you can do other than just elbow grease? Is there anything? It's magical solution?
So some glass has, I think it's like a chemical reaction that happens in certain types of glass where it becomes cloudy, and you will never get that clean.
Yeah, I've had that with things I've had in the past as terrariums, and you just think, surely it must be etched in that it's not coming off.
That stuff doesn't come off.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's just elbow grease, kitchen paper, and also some terrariums like awkward shapes. So if you can get your hand into it, it's nice and easy. But like this, you need the long tweezers, a bit of kitchen paper, and you need to get into that corner. But if you have something even bigger, I don't know, perhaps that's a good example.
Yeah.
Maybe tweezers would work in that, but some terrariums are huge with a small opening. What I would do is get like thick gauge bonsai wire, wrap it round a few times, tape some kitchen paper to the end, and then get in it that way. It can be a challenge.
Attention to detail. This is what it's all about. So we've talked about, I think you haven't talked about this sort of triangular one here. Well, tell me about that one.
So it has an unnamed orchid in it. I bought it from N1 Garden Centre in London. It's a great garden centre. I love this style of planting. So this is just a cork tube, and I actually divided this recently because I used some of the orchid elsewhere. But what I did was I took a hollow cork tube, and I cut it in half, then filled the middle with sphagnum moss, but good quality sphagnum moss. I think it's really important to use that because some of that cheaper stuff, I don't know, I don't like the idea of a nice orchid's roots growing in that. This is really good quality. And yeah, I took the orchid from the pot, divided it, popped it along, and it's grown. This was full. I should have probably waited until after the podcast to divide it. But yeah, this has grown really nicely. And these are actually made by someone in Malaysia who sent them to me 3 years ago. But I think that's a really fun way of planting plants in a terrarium, which almost mimics that epiphytic tree branch. And I got the idea from someone called Matthew Schwartz. He has a channel called Another World Terraria, and that as a source for information about rare and miniature terrarium plants, it's second to none. It's a really interesting page.
Yeah, is that going to flower? Has that flowered, that orchid?
It hasn't flowered yet.
Will it though? I mean, in those conditions, do you think it might do?
I don't know. I mean, I really like the foliage.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, if it flowers, that'd be great. But if it didn't, I wouldn't be too disappointed.
So I think we've talked about most of these ones up here. What about these other two on the other side here?
So this one is a jewel orchid. Oh, I can't reach it. I'm going to go and get it. Which is flowered, actually. Oops.
Oh, yes.
So I actually made these two terrariums for the announcement of my book because they're actually bookends.
Ah, these are the bookend ones. Yeah, I remember seeing these.
So they kind of sit like that.
Yeah.
And then I've got those small LED lights that sit on top. And yeah, these must be about, I don't know, 5 months old. When was April?
It's the summer holidays, but I couldn't tell you. I've totally lost track. 5 months ago, yeah, roughly.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, this has a jewel orchid in it. I'm not sure of the species, but it's flowered. I should probably trim that flower. And I will take this out soon and use it elsewhere. I never really had much luck with jewel orchids, to be completely honest with you. but this is planted in like a bed of sphagnum leaf litter. I use a lot of leaf litter and leaf mold. And this one is doing okay. Maybe not so great, but
I mean, there must be some terrarium fails. You must have sometimes where
so
it just
many.
goes absolutely tits up, to use a technical word, and you just think I can't. I mean, do you document that? Do you talk about that? How do you handle when it goes wrong?
So I think being a content creator, it was something I did a lot more like in the early days, but now being more specific with what content I put out there, it's not something I document as much, though I happily talk about it. More often than not, I'm glad to say they do work.
Yeah.
But I've had so many fail, like so many. I've wasted a lot of money. Well, it wasn't wasted because I learned a lot, right? But I've killed a lot of plants along the way, both terrarium plants and non-terrarium plants, house plants on the allotment, in the garden. Lots of things didn't work for me. But that's like a key part of learning, I think. And taking it back to terrarium building, I think if you do just get the basics right, light, soil, and the watering, it's kind of hard to go wrong. But I've had a lot of failure with my terrariums for sure.
How does that usually materialize? Is it you sort of think something's going okay, and then you really have a close look at it and realize that something's completely melted, or you've got mold raging through the...
Yeah, I mean, mold, if you use the good materials, isn't such a problem, but me and any kind of begonia don't seem to get on.
This seems to be turning into the begonia hate podcast, because we had lots of begonia. I did actually bring a begonia with me up there. So to show that there's a couple actually. Yeah, to show that I do love my begonias actually. But there's begonias and begonias, right? It's a really big genus.
Yeah,
and
there's a few epiphytic ones I have which are amazing. Like you can't kill them even if you tried. But then some of the more, I don't know, some of the other varieties, they just melt.
Yeah.
A friend of mine sent me some plants recently, and he has a huge list of begonia on his website, and I was like, I actually don't want any right now. Send me the other stuff. I think I'll just kill it.
Yeah. It's tricky, isn't it? But I suppose, like we always say with indoor gardening, I guess light is the thing. People do get this very wrong. I mean, how do you know what are the signs that light is going badly? What are the danger signs where you've got to think to yourself, I've got to take some action here, both too much and too little?
I mean, etiolation's one that's quite obvious. Like you can see the moss in the bottom of here isn't growing as it should.
So it's stretching out, becoming spindly.
In the search of light. I think generally just if the plants don't look healthy, and the distance between the leaves, those nodes they're quite long, then it's going to be hard to rectify that. I usually cut them back and then replant them, but it's such an important one, like obviously. And I think with terrarium building, I would encourage everyone to purchase a light meter. They're inexpensive. You can get them on your phone because it will tell you literally if your terrarium or plant will survive in this space. With terrarium building, I think north-facing windows are great because you get all of that light but without any direct sun. So you can almost guarantee that a prop box or a terrarium placed in a north-facing window is going to do well. We have east and west, so we get a bit of the sun in there, or quite a lot of sun. And it's interesting because I have quite a large terrarium, which I didn't bring with me, with a ficus microcarpa, those bulbous ones sold at IKEA. And it's grown exceptionally well, and it gets blasted with the sun at the back end of the day. So I think you kind of have to figure out what works for you. But you do need to ensure that your terrarium or plants are getting enough light. And for me, a light meter has been very helpful.
It's a real revelation when you start using that and you go into a corner, you're like, it's literally on, almost zero in the darkest corners of your home. And then as soon as you're moving toward the light, the levels just increase exponentially, and it's an eye opener.
And even what you see as what you think might be a bright spot, like probably isn't enough for the plants that you want to grow there.
Yeah.
I love Daryl Chang's book. I have not read his latest one, but that was what got me really thinking about light. And yeah, I bought a light meter because of Daryl Chang.
Yeah, well, he's guest and friend of the show. Very, very useful advice there. And I always find when you look at, if you get a chance to have a look at commercial growing stats on what what level of light they're using to grow common houseplants, it is way higher than anything you're going to be able to get in your home. And that's why when you get the plant out of the plant shop straight from the nursery, that's why it looks amazing, because it's been grown evenly under very carefully controlled light, which obviously we just don't have at home. But yeah, light is just absolutely vital, isn't it? And you don't want them to boil, but the likelihood is more greater that they're just not getting enough.
Yeah, and I think with terrarium building, you have to be. Soil is obviously a very important component of growing plants in any horticultural setting. But with terrarium building, I noticed that when I started using bonsai mediums, the terrariums I made had a much higher success rate, and they are expensive. And if you're only making one or two, perhaps buying a pre-made soil is best. But I love bonsai soil so much. Things like akadama and lava rock and molar clay. It's great in soil. You can grow moss on it. You can grind akadama down and put it on the side of a terrarium and grow moss on it. I'm a huge advocate for using bonsai mediums.
Because a lot of times people are using substrates in terrariums that seem to be just like the organic matter, like it's just too hard, and that's where you're getting the mold problems from, presumably.
Presumably, I think with making a terrarium soil, the bonsai mediums on their own. I was speaking with someone about this who uses a semi-hydro mix, and like if you use that in a plant pot, you kind of have to flush it through to so the granules absorb all the water. Now, if you were to just use semi-hydro or bonsai soil in a terrarium, you can't really flush it through, which is why you need to mix it with something. I mean, bonsai mediums are water retentive, but you need to mix it with something that's, like a good compost or coir, leaf mold, just something so it can hold on to the moisture. But yeah, I'm very much team bonsai soil. I think it's amazing.
Is it becoming easier to get hold of because it's become so much more popular?
Yeah, so akadama is always imported from Japan. I think Brexit made it difficult to get lava rock into the country. I've always found it easy to get molar clay. I think molar clay is incredible. And
is that the one where people get it from, like, it's sold as like to clear up spills on the floors of garages, like
it's very multifunctional. So it's used as a cat litter. It's used for mechanics on diesel spills, and I think it's used in lots of other industries. But it's amazing to use in a terrarium with bonsai as well. That's something I got very interested in for a period of time, and that's where I learned about the importance of soil. I was lucky enough to spend time with Peter Chan and Harry Harrington, and they would always talk about the quality of your soil and how that reflects in the quality of the tree. And yeah, it just surprises me that they're not used more. Well, they are being used more, but I was surprised people weren't using them more, especially when I was interested in bonsai. And in terrarium building, I certainly wasn't the first person to do it, but I'm seeing more and more people use bonsai mediums now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's move on to some of your other pursuits. You've branched out, excuse the pun, from plants to animals, so you've got a bit of a menagerie now. I mean, I was looking through your socials yesterday. Michelangelo the tortoise, dart frogs, praying mantises, your jumping spider. I mean, how does that change what you do and how you work? And what do the animals, the creatures bring that's different to what you're doing?
I think a terrarium in itself is a very interesting thing think about the different cycles that occur within it, the length of time it can last. When you add, say, isopods and springtails, it then opens up the conversation about decomposition, their role within that. And then you can go into invertebrates, so like your praying mantises and things like that. The story of, I always wanted pets when I was young, but my mother wouldn't allow it. My sister did get a leopard gecko, which I was very angry she was allowed one and I wasn't, but she was 8 years older than me. But then went to university and left the gecko with us. And then I realized you had to feed them crickets. And back then I was like freaked out by things like that. But at this age now, learning about praying mantids and jumping spiders and, the other animals like the small glass frogs that I have and dart frogs, and then mixing with those communities because they're huge. I didn't realize this. The isopod community is giant. There are some people who have built some very successful businesses selling isopods. They're sometimes used as food for reptiles and other things, but I quite like keeping the isopods almost as a pet. It's like my pet bug. I think they're just a very fascinating story behind these animals. Praying mantids go through a series of molts, and I'm not sure if you've ever seen a praying mantis egg sac hatch. I hadn't until the other day, where 300 of these mantids abseiled down out of this egg sac, and I had no idea. And I have this egg sac. I caught the footage, but then I had 300 praying mantises, which I didn't really know what to do with. Not all of them make it, and I gave some to some friends. If you want a praying mantis, you're welcome to one. But it's a really fascinating world. The jumping spiders are highly intelligent. They almost have like a personality. And then going on to things like the frogs and the lizards, I think it's quite often people will say they don't like the idea of animals in captivity, but I think there's a bigger conversation to be had than just that. Captive breeding programs have stopped animals from going extinct, and there are reintroductory programs. I was speaking with a friend of mine he's doing his master's, and he's working with an organization in South America where they're giving him some wild caught glass frogs to breed, and then they're going to reintroduce them into the wild. So I think it's not always as it seems. It's not just an animal in a box. There is more to it often than what we see on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And these creatures are fascinating. I think you've got some. Have you got some Ranitomea imitator dart
Yeah.
frogs? You have. Well, I was reading about these the other day for something I'm working on, because they use the Phytotelmata, the little tiny pools in Dieffenbachias, as places for their young. And I didn't realise that because I'd seen that they have different. There's different. What's the word? I suppose you might use the word morph. I suppose different versions of them, and I didn't realise that actually they're imitating 3 other species
That's
of
right.
much more poisonous dart frogs.
I didn't know this either until I did the research when I was writing the script for the video. They are fascinating.
Yeah, they're amazing creatures. I was like, so they have different versions of themselves, which different specimens will have a different camouflage, pretending to be this much more poisonous frog, which is not. I mean, how does that happen? It's amazing.
These I have 2, and they're so shy, but they are so small. They call them thumbnail frogs because they don't get much bigger than your thumbnail.
Yeah.
But they are incredible. They live in a huge vivarium. It's one of the biorberths. It's really something. And they're beautiful. But they're not poisonous in captivity because they don't eat the required insects which give them that poison. So
got you.
pretty much any dart frog you have in captivity is not poisonous.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, they are absolutely fascinating. And I find those interactions with plants, the way they use plants and work with plants is absolutely fascinating. They are really cool, and they just look beautiful in your videos as well. But you must spend a lot of time with your camera just waiting for those things to do what you're...
Yeah.
I mean, you can't direct a dart frog or a jumping spider.
Any animal. It's, I spent 8 hours the other day filming a 5-legged praying mantis try and catch a fly, because it was a key part of this video.
I watched that video the other day. Yeah, the one that had a damaged leg.
And it's regrown the leg completely.
That's amazing.
Now. And it's a bit strange sometimes when I speak with my friends from when I was a postie. They're like, "Oh, so like, how are things going?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's going pretty well. I spent all day filming a baby gecko in a Lego set that I built for it." It's it's quite surreal sometimes, but yeah, you can't make animals do. You just have to keep that camera rolling and hope that they do something.
Yeah. I know what you mean about jumping spiders. Even jumping spiders in my garden, like, is it the zebra spider, the ones, they do seem to have they are real characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting on my patio and one's just been kind of wandering about, and then they're kind of like, they've just got something about them that is just very charismatic, those jumping spiders.
I completely agree. I've had 2 jumping spiders. My second one, it seems bolder than the first one that I had. It recognizes. I'm not sure if it actually recognizes me, but it knows when it's feeding time. And I didn't. They look very cute. Like, if you look at a jumping spider head on, it has like that one eyebrow that looks like one eyebrow.
Yeah.
It has like cute features. It looks like it has 2 eyes. But when it revealed its fangs, when it goes to eat this cricket, you can see like it's actually a very skilled hunter. But this is what I really love. It's easy to tell stories about these animals because they're so interesting. There's so many praying mantids, so many kinds of jumping spider, so many kinds of interesting frog. I actually have a frog phobia, which was crippling when I was younger. I had to leave a job as a gardener because of it.
Really?
In the same way, my sister's scared of spiders, and if there was a spider in the room, she would bolt, she would go. For me, it's similar with frogs, but it's like large frogs I struggle with. And last night, I have some tadpoles of starry night reed frogs that I'm raising, and they must be about 2 weeks from emerging from the water. And I went to the fridge yesterday because we have a small flat, so the sort of aquarium they're in is right next to the fridge. So I went to the fridge yesterday to get a drink of milk, and there was the tiniest white frog who had just emerged, sat on top of the aquarium. And like, it took me by surprise. I had to get Grace to come and put it back into its home. But yeah, it's really fascinating. And I've connected with some amazing people as well, who create content on animals and terrariums. So it's a very interesting space. And I love the merge of terrarium community, the vivarium community, the aquarium community. It's like, it's really exciting. And I'm going to AnimalCon in October, so I get to meet a lot of these creators, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
That sounds fun. Well, local to me, we have a local amphibian, which is which is an invasive species in this country, but not actually invasive at all. Have you heard of the midwife toad, which is a Mediterranean toad? And it freaks a lot of people out around where I live because it sounds like, when your smoke alarm's running out of battery, the beep sounds exactly, and I mean exactly like that. So lots of people are like calling up electricians and saying, I've got something going wrong. There's some piece of machinery is not working.
No, you got a toad in your house.
And it's actually the midwife toad, and they like to, because they're a Mediterranean species, they like to hang out in like piles of rock and brick walls and things. So they're just everywhere, and you don't see them very often, but they are really. They're cute little toads, and they're really, really lovely. The males carry the eggs on their backs, which is why they're called the midwife toad.
Right.
They're really, really cool, but probably not great in a terrarium. But I just love the fact that people are like thinking they've got an electronic issue, and it's actually just a toad.
It's funny, when I moved to London, so my workspace was downstairs when I was in Worcester, and that's where my glass frogs were. When I moved to London, my workspace was right next to our bedroom, and the glass frogs were put in there, and I would just hear this cheep 2 or 3 times a minute. And I was like, what is that? And then when you go into the room, you realise how loud it is, and it's the glass frogs, the male glass frogs calling. And I described it as a smoke alarm low on battery. We got used to it in the end, but first few nights, all the way through the night, 3 times a minute, cheep, cheep.
It's a fascinating world. I mean, these are the ones that have the where you can actually see their inside their abdomen, their digestive system. And what does that serve a purpose? Why do they do that?
I think it's mainly for camouflage. Like, they have the ability to hide their red blood cells, so they become even more transparent.
Right.
They are really fascinating creatures, and again, so tiny. It's a bit sad, really, because I know a lot of them are being brought into the country, wild caught, which obviously isn't a good thing, which is why these captive breeding programs are important. We know people are going to keep them as pets, so preserving wild populations by breeders breeding them I think is a good thing, because any sort of exotic pet was wild caught at some point, and we're not going to stop the exotic pet industry. So yeah, this emphasises the importance of captive breeding programs.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they're really cute. These animals, these frogs, are super cute.
Absolutely. I think you're either the kind of person that, I mean, my daughter's got a milk snake, so we have rats in the freezer. You're either kind of a rats in the freezer kind of person who's prepared to do that for your pet, or you have a problem with all of these kind of things, and I mean, you must have viewers who. Some people, as you say, phobias exist. Have you ever had that in a workshop or a situation where you've had to kind of like talk somebody down from a real fear of creepy crawlies, as people term them?
I always tell people you don't have to add them. It's not a necessity. Children seem to love to do it. But you don't have to add springtails to your terrarium. They're not going to cure mold issues. That really stems back to using good quality materials. But they do feed on mold, and they do help. They're detritivores. They do help the decaying process. So they can be beneficial, but they're not a necessity. But yeah, so some people, like, if I say, oh yeah, and we do have some isopods, some people really don't like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know. It's strange, isn't it? I think it's a human instinct. And particularly, I think in the houseplant world, the temptation is to think that anything moving in your soil is a deadly enemy. And oftentimes, you get sent a picture. What's going on? I've lifted up this pot and there's all these springtails. It's good. It's good news. It's good news. I love
your
a
soil to be
springtail.
alive and
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
sterilised.
No, exactly, and that's important for your terrariums, I suppose. Is there anything living that you don't want to be finding in your terrariums, that if you find, you're kind of like, oh no?
Ooh, I found a flatworm.
Oh really?
Yeah, and I was really surprised by that, because they're quite ominous looking things. And I found one in I was given some leaf mold. I love leaf mold. I think it's amazing. And I'd put it into a terrarium, and I saw something moving, and then it was a flatworm, which are invasive, and so you wouldn't want one of those. And I think the guidelines is to kill them and dispose of them. I mean, really, it's mites can be a problem. You can have predatory mites which feed on springtails. So you want more springtails than mites, but it's. I don't know. It kind of just whatever happens, and I kind of just roll with it. I don't like to try and eradicate a mite population in a terrarium. They've got a right to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did also. We were talking about slugs before we started recording, and there are mites that live on slugs. If you ever get up close and personal with a slug and have a look at it, there's probably mites wandering all over it, because there are specialist slug mites.
We have them on us as well.
Yeah, we've got them on
ourselves.
ourselves. I do like to say that to people when they're talking about. It's like, you realise you've got them on your face right now.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't like to think of that, but you're absolutely
but it's
right.
True, and I used to be very squeamish with with things. And I think, first of all, traveling to India and Southeast Asia really helped that. But then also, this
And having an allotment as
gardening.
well. I mean,
Yeah,
on an allotment, you're going to come across all kinds of. I mean,
yeah.
you know, all human life and all animal life is there on the allotment, isn't
Yeah. I
it?
didn't see a single frog on my allotment,
Right.
which was for me probably a good thing, but not a good sign in general. But yeah, you're right. You see a lot. We had badger problems, and yeah, I miss having that allotment though.
Do you think you'll ever go back to it?
My dream would be to retire early and to have a nice, not too big garden, nice walled garden where I could grow vegetables, spend my days listening to the radio.
Sounds
That would
absolutely
be that's
heavenly.
my dream. But like to get there, I've got like I'm enjoying the path I'm on.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, as you say, like when you're talking to, colleagues from your previous work and you're sort of saying, as I say, I mean, it doesn't sound too bad spending
no,
hours watching a jumping spider. It sounds pretty good. I mean, obviously there's all the background to that, which is there's business to be done. There's important things you need to do. Let's get into that for a minute. Like, what people will want to know: how are you actually producing this stuff? Do you have a lot of fancy kit? Where are you recording? Do you have anyone working for you? How does that all work?
I do everything on my own. Um, for context, I built an audience of about 1 million followers just with my smartphone. I edited on in app on Instagram and TikTok, which is just a complete no no. I then upgraded to iMovie, but iMovie's not very good. I then bought a small Sony ZV-1 camera. It's not very good. You can film for 6 minutes at a time, pretty much. So, and I still to this day, I don't really know how to use a camera that well. I've recently switched to using manual focus when I'm filming animals, and that has been it's been a game changer. But I'm just learning as I go along. To be really specific, I use a Lumix GH5 camera, which actually belongs to my girlfriend. But I really like that. I'm going to upgrade it soon. But all the filming, editing, script writing, everything, I do everything. But I do want to delegate that eventually because it is, as we were speaking about before, editing takes so much time. Filming, I think I'll always do the filming. Maybe have some other people come on board at some point. But yeah, I'd love to delegate it. And I think going forwards, I'd love to be able to build out a team where we can make incredible content about terrariums and animals and yeah, it's been a strange ride, but I've learned a lot on the way. And I think when you do go on this path, you do meet people who can help you. So I do know people who know how to use cameras, who know about lighting, and so yeah, you can always lean on people with this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is how it starts. In your bedroom, doing this stuff yourself. You're on a steep learning curve, but hopefully you're having fun at the same time.
Yeah,
And I mean,
definitely.
it's ended up with some amazing collabs that you've done with like Disney and Marvel. I mean, are there any? Tell me about how that was, but also any dream collabs that you want to sort of put out into the universe in case anyone's.
If I had to choose one brand to work with, it'd probably be Lego. I love Lego. I always have since I was young, so I would love to be able to work with Lego. Disney and Marvel, that was in one collab. It was for the Ant-Man movie. I'd never seen any Marvel movies really, so I had to do my homework there. And that was the first real job I had that was well paid. Like YouTube had always brought an income, TikTok was up and down, and then I did workshops, but that was the first big brand deal I ever had. Then I did, and I think it's really interesting the topic of making money as a content creator, especially in horticulture. Horticulture is like notoriously an industry where people perhaps aren't that well paid. Certainly compared to the amount of work they do, because it's hard work a lot of the time. And I think content creation is it does give people the opportunity to get very well paid for the work they do. So I think being able to create good quality videos is the business card that enables people to see you. And then I did a job with Paramount, which was fun for I forgot the name of the TV series, the Castaways, which is also a book. So I did a video for them, which again it was very well paid, but I was lucky to have a brand deal with Biorb. So I make content for them on a retainer basis, which is really helpful because it's difficult when you're self-employed to make money sometimes, especially as a content creator. But then to be within a niche space like horticulture can also be difficult. But then to go even further niche in terrarium building, you know, it can be difficult to generate income. So, but I think it all comes down to making good quality videos and telling stories that are going to capture the attention of not just people in the terrarium space or horticulture space, but people like universally. I think
And how did the Ant-Man terrarium go down with the Marvel fandom? Because I mean that's quite a like there's people who are I mean that's not it's not my jam, but that must be quite a lot of pressure.
I mean, I would do the terrarium differently now.
Right.
There were people. It was a mixed bag. Some people were like, "Oh, we don't like the way this looks. It's rubbish," and then some people really liked it. I think I was so almost like nervous about creating a video for Disney that I ended up getting a team to work with me on this. I had like my friends come in with their good cameras and good sound gear. When I think, and this is no criticism on them, they did a great job. But I think if I could do it now, I would do it differently. But yeah, it was interesting seeing what some of the Marvel fans said about it. But it was my own version of the quantum realm. So it was very much like open for interpretation.
How do you deal with that? You must, with that many followers, you must get some kickback and some nasty comments and things. How do you deal with that? Have you got a thick skin, or do you find that difficult, or has that got easier as you've got more experience?
It gets easier with experience. People are always, not everyone's going to like what you do. I think I remove the emotion from it. It doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
I remove the emotion from it. If someone wants to say something nasty to me online, that's fine. You can say it, but it's not going to upset me. I've had people talk about my heritage, the way I look. This just comes with being online. So yeah, people deal with it differently, but for me, I don't feed it. I just ignore it. Unless someone says something, like about my heritage or something, then I'll probably bite back. But yeah, I've got used to it. Not this is the wrong way. It doesn't happen that often. As you said, with experience, you learn how to deal with things like this better.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't have an inside voice and just wants to throw everything out there, and also, every thought that passes into their brain.
Of course, and like also if I receive criticism from my girlfriend or someone I love, or then yeah, I'd listen to that. But some dude sat behind a keyboard in America with Confederate flags all over his Facebook page, like I'm just not gonna care what you have to say to me.
I know. I mean, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to sort of put it into context. But I mean, at the same time, like I imagine you're in a way, and I am certainly in a privileged position in that you've kind of got to where you are, and it's you've had enough time and experience of life to kind of be able to cope with it. But online can be a sort of a scary place, I think, if you don't have that kind of
and there's
backup.
Absolutely, there's different levels of it too. I think ultimately I'm making quite wholesome content, so I'm not talking about politics or divisive issues. So I don't tend to get too many bad comments, but certain people making certain types of content will get a lot more of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's certainly a problem for certain creators.
Yeah, I mean, we this is late night on the ledge, so we need to spill some tea. I mean, is there anything in the terrarium world that really you want to sort of call out or
Yeah.
say, look, come on, let's change this, because there must be things out there that you're looking at and just
Yeah.
despairing over.
I think anyone who's using the term self-sustaining ecosystem to sell a product, I think it's a lie. It's not a self-sustaining ecosystem. Anyone who tells you that is either misinformed or they're trying to sell you something, which if you listen to that advice, it's going to die, and then you've had a negative experience with a terrarium. And I think a lot of people would have had this. A lot of people will say, "Oh, they don't work. They just die. They become messy." So, and I think self-sustaining ecosystem, and a lot of people use this, is a misleading term. Sure, if you have a terrarium like David Lassiter's that's lasted 50 years, then yeah, you could say that's a self-sustaining.
Or was he the guy with the carboy, the one that's been like was in all the tabloids and everything?
Yeah. So
is that real? Is that a real? Is he? Does he? I mean, has it been?
I mean, as far as I know, I'd love to go and see it. I think.
Is he still alive? Is it still?
I think he's quite old now.
Yeah. This is this giant glass bottle that's like got a tiny. I mean, this is how they back in the day. I mean, I'm old enough to remember this the first time round in the 70s and 80s. That was what a terrarium was, right? It was one of those big carboys, sometimes in green glass, sometimes with like miniature or little baby parlor palms and things. That was what people had as terrariums, wasn't it? And this guy, how old is it now? Do we know how? Is it several decades?
63 or 64 years old, and it was only watered once in the early 70s. Twice. Once on the day of planting, then 10 years later, the cork was removed, the only time it was opened.
Right.
And then it was watered again. And I think it was a single Tradescantia cutting was put inside of it.
Tradescantia, oh my God. That's another one.
I knew this was going to hit a nerve.
It's triggering me now. I mean, I love Tradescantias, but in a terrarium, just no.
Yeah. But I mean, in this instance, it's lasted a long time. But I think, going back to my point about self-sustaining ecosystems, I think it's damaging to the hobby. And I would like to see that not be said anymore.
Yeah. Well, how should we be describing terrariums instead? What would be the better
little propagation chambers, or I don't know, like a micro ecosystem. It is a little ecosystem. The ambient room temperature combined with the humidity of a terrarium does create an ecosystem where you can grow an orchid or or moss or a tiny saxifraga. But like I said at the start, I think it's if I was selling someone a terrarium, the first thing I would say to them would be like, it's like a house plant. You're going to have to repot it. You're going to have to perform some maintenance on it. And I hear all the time people online on their websites saying, there's no maintenance. If you listen to this advice, if you listen to that advice with a houseplant, your houseplant would suffer. And it's the same thing with a terrarium. It's just, it's in a pot with no drainage holes and it has a lid. So I think it's really important to sort of like get good information across. And I do think I'm hopeful that in a similar way to the aquarium hobby that's a lot more established than terrarium building, we're going to see terrarium building get more popular. I think it's extremely accessible. Not to say negative things about the aquatics hobby, but there's like an entry level which requires you to spend some money. You have to test your water parameters, you have to introduce like certain kinds of fish and plants, and then it can be very difficult. Whereas I do think terrarium building, this cheap jar from Amazon or H&M or an empty spirits bottle with less than £5 worth of materials can create something quite beautiful. I think that's a real strength for the terrarium hobby.
I have to say also thank you, because also on this table we've got something you've brought for me. I brought you nothing in return, which I feel bad about. But Ben has bought me this tiny. Now, long-term listeners will know my love of the saxifrages is strong, and I've got these tiny Saxifraga stolonifera. Wait, is it actually got a cultivar? Like, is it got a name? This
Yakushima or just micro?
it's a very small one. So in the back here, we've got my sort of regular size ones. In fact, those are sort of slightly dwarfed because they're in a bowl, but these are really tiny. I guess for terrariums, ideal.
Perfect. That is probably the perfect terrarium plant. It doesn't grow any higher than a few centimeters,
Yep.
and it will spread. So I was sent a clump from someone in China, and since then, and it's been about a year, I've given a lot away to friends, and I still have a considerable. Well, I have a few plants at home.
Yeah, a good clump. Well, I mean, I'm really glad to have that because I do love these plants, and I shall have to do something with them.
It will need to go in a terrarium.
Yeah, I'm going to have to. You're basically just forcing me to. I mean, I have got, and despite the fact I haven't done any terrariums for ages, I still do pick up pieces of glass and think, oh yes, that would make a good terrarium. So now I've got to actually follow through on that, which I'll do. So what I'm thinking about is I'm going to need some of that good Akadama soil, bonsai soil maybe, and
You can take one of these if you want. Like, I mean, and the saxifraga will work perfectly great in there.
oh, that's so good.
And
This is turning out into the perfect episode. Yeah, I love that, and actually have got a grow light on my desk, which is currently not being used, so even better. So I'm excited to try that, and I think that, as you say, that changing your mindset into the idea of it being like a propagation chamber is very, very useful, because although there is probably less maintenance than a maidenhair fern or something that's going to need watering every few days, it's certainly not no maintenance, and I think that can lead people down. And so many terrariums are sold already made up.
That's another one of my. So you asked me about my sort of pet hates within the terrarium world, like mass-produced terrariums.
Yeah, because I saw them the other day in like one of the big chain. I can't think which of the chains it was. Lidl. It might have been Lidl. I think it was Lidl actually. And I'm just thinking, I don't know how. I'm envisaging the production line to make these terrariums.
Of course.
It's not going to be great.
And I think that's something I've always got in my mind is like, I want to create something that looks beautiful. It doesn't need to take hours of work, but just sometimes a single plant in a container, like with just some moss in a container. There was some plants in there, but they died. I think is aesthetically a lot more pleasing than cramming loads of these common plants in a terrarium. There's even ways you can use common plants to good effect. I think when I was on stage with you at Malvern, taking loads of cuttings from a Photonia plant and then just covering the surface of the soil in Photonia cuttings looks beautiful. Whereas if you just, I don't know, plonk a Photonia in next to a Nephrolepis fern and a Tradescantia at the back, it's going to look like it was mass produced, And I think the mass production of terrariums not only doesn't look nice, but will have a negative impact on people's experience with them, which negatively impacts the terrarium world itself. But it's getting better. I think it's getting better, and I genuinely believe it's going to have an upwards trajectory, and I think you're going to see it. You're going to see more and more of them.
That terrarium that you did at the Malvern show, the Houseplant Festival there, was really clever because Phoetonias, I mean, let's be honest about Phoetonias outside terrariums. I mean, they're just so needy. They're just
Complete
so
nightmare.
needy. You can do it, but the amount of monitoring they require to stop them from falling over from not enough water, especially when they're in small containers, it's quite a lot. It's not the easiest thing. As soon as you put them into that terrarium environment, that really surprised me that you could put them in there just as cuttings, and obviously it shouldn't have done because it's a propagation chamber, as you've said, but the fact that you could artfully arrange those Phoetonias in there, those nerve plants, and I think that fact that you've just got the one type of plant, actually, the impact is great.
Yeah, and I think it's like with that. Have I been saying saxifraga wrong?
Well, no, there's no wrong pronunciation.
I heard you say it, and I was like, have I just embarrassed myself on the Jane Perrin podcast?
Not at all, not at all. Because I think, I mean, I'm the person who says Monstera, and everyone else seems to say Monstera, which I swear is an American thing.
Have you? I don't know if you listen to Epic Gardening. He called chamomile chamomile.
Well, wasn't that though? It wasn't that. Isn't that one of those things?
Yeah.
That, I mean, I'm on TikTok. I'm not gonna slag people off on TikTok, but I swear to God, people deliberately make mistakes in their video just so they can get people commenting and going, "Oh, that's not whatever."
It's kind of. I mean, it's kind of smart in a way.
I think
perhaps you did it on purpose. I mean, you know,
chamomile, that was hilarious.
It was funny.
Chamomile, yes. Well, then again, I mean, you know, this is where, you know, us Brits and, you know, we get annoyed with Americans saying cilantro and instead of coriander.
It's just how people say things.
Well, yeah, and I don't know. I mean, as somebody who I feel like it's running through me like a stick of rock is trying to educate people about plants. So the idea of deliberately getting something wrong, it's making my whole face twitch thinking about that. But I can see why as a strategy,
engagement tactic. You know, I made a video the other day which was watch what happens when I put a peach in a terrarium, but it was a nectarine. So I'm guilty of it. I knew it was a nectarine, but I also of course people are going to be like, that's not a peach, that's a nectarine. And lo and behold, the comment section.
I'd be less bothered about that, but I'd be less. Yeah, I mean, well, on the saxifrage, how do you say it?
I say saxifraga.
Saxifraga, stolonifera. I mean, you know, like I don't think it really matters. We both knew exactly what we were talking about. There was no confusion, and I always find when you go to other countries, you know, in Europe and further afield, that you then meet botanists and things, and people will be pronouncing genera in all kinds of ways, and you just kind of raise your eyebrows and go, "Oh yeah, that's what they're talking about," and that's just I try not to get too worried about that because there's no real wrong or right answer. I think it's fine. But
my initial point about that was if you have a beautiful container and you put a single saxifraga division into that, and then you leave it for 6 months to a year, then that container is just going to be covered in that saxifraga, and it's going to look really nice. It's going to hit a point where it hits the walls and you're going to have to divide it, but that's a good thing. And on the day it's planted, much like a garden, it will never look worse because you just have a single cutting in this container with loads of bare soil around it. You can top it with some akadama, make it look a bit nicer like I did in here, but being patient with it, you know, it doesn't have to look 100% on day one. And I think being patient, I think, is really important. One of my final things is not necessarily people within the terrarium world who say this, but the use of the word terranium.
Oh gosh,
where does this N come from? Yeah,
you've hit a button now because I've been doing some shifts in a houseplant shop local to me, not another jungle, and it's amazing. And I love it because it is I love the fact that people coming in the shop, you know, you get everybody on the spectrum from very little knowledge to very experienced. But that's one of the things that I immediately want to make a beeline for a person when they're saying, "Oh, look, they've got terrariums," and then I've literally got to hold myself back from being, you know, ridiculously pedantic. I don't know where's it come from.
It's so common, honestly.
Is it even in the dictionary? Is that a word? It's not even a word in the dictionary.
I don't think so. But it is so common. I don't know how... It's
amazing how that's spread, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I mean, I just obviously just very politely just say terrarium and hopefully people pick that up.
They'll pick up on it, yeah. Same.
But I mean, this is the amazing thing about language. It might be in 100 years' time we're all calling them terraniums.
Yeah. Let's hope not.
Let's hope not.
But yeah, I'd say those are the things really. My gripes with the terrarium world. It's generally quite a wholesome world. The people in it are very nice. And yeah, I think it's what some creators are doing right now is really exceptional, and I think it has a bright future.
But let's just bring it back to the tea first, though. Any like debates raging in the terrarium, not terranium world right now? What are there must be a few things where people are like having a big debate about something that's causing controversy. Is there anything like that, or is it all agreed and everything's nice?
I think on the plant side of things, certainly it's generally speaking, it's quite tame. When you go into the vivarium space and see how certain people keep animals, and then there's a lot of friction.
Gosh, I know this from the snake, from my daughter having a snake. Like, you speak to one person and you say, well, how often should we be feeding this, 1-month-old snake or 1-year-old snake? And you get 5 different answers, and everyone is really virulent about their answer being the correct one.
I think
and it's quite intimidating when you come to something like that, having an animal which is a living being, and you feel more than you do, I think, with plants. You feel like you've got to really make sure you're getting it right.
Yeah, I agree, and I think with especially with the amphibians and reptiles, because they need nutrition. So you have to, if you just feed a glass frog or a dart frog just fruit flies, they're going to become malnourished. They need calcium and vitamin A and numerous other nutrients. And people have different schedules on how they feed these animals. So you speak to the pet shop, they'll tell you to give them with every feeding. You speak to another pet shop, they'll give you other advice. What I've learned is to speak with people or learn from people on YouTube or Reddit who have been doing it for many years. So for me, that's always my first port of call. Like the Starry Night reed frogs that I have, you don't see them in this country. They're very rare. So the information on them is very small. But there's a guy, Clint's Reptiles Online, who, based in the USA, amazing knowledge about it. So that is 100% where I try and get my information around animals. Because you're right, you have to. It's not like a plant. They're not disposable. Like not that a plant should be. So you have you need to care for this thing as best as you can. So yeah.
Well, I can report the milk snake is fine. It's now 3 or 4 years old. It's absolutely fine. It has been going through one of those, I don't know if you have this with amphibians, but with reptiles, where they go through this teenage period where they decide not to eat for a few weeks or months, and that was a bit scary. But anyway, she's fine. It's all good, but it's a weight of responsibility, especially for me as somebody who'd never owned that kind of. I know how to deal with dogs and to some extent horses, but snakes, like, I've got. I'm just no idea. So it's such a learning curve, but it has been fascinating, and I can see why you wanted to bring those into what you're doing. How much time do you end up spending caring for all these creatures? Is that a pleasure and a burden?
Yes, like I mean, more pleasure, more on the pleasure side. To anyone who wants to get animals, like that is something you absolutely have to think about. I get home late sometimes. I've got a baby crested gecko at home. I've got some frogs, the tortoise. Like, it's a time expense. You have to give time to these animals. So it does take up a considerable amount of time. And when you go on holiday, not everyone's going to want to dust fruit flies in calcium and put them in a vivarium for you. So yeah. I'm fortunate that a friend of mine at the studio is going to do this for me. And our neighbour is going to look after Michelangelo. He's very cute,
He's a tortoise. What's not to love?
Yeah. So yeah, I actually forgot your initial question, but.
It sounds like you get a lot of joy out of it, but like any animal ownership, it's a responsibility.
It's absolutely a responsibility, and it's loads of people get pets without considering this and end up giving them away or worse. It's so yeah, definitely think about that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been a delight to chat to you. And of course, I always say this, but I'm going to say it again. Do go and check out the show notes, because my daughter will be going through the transcript and she'll be adding in all the links for the other creators that you've mentioned. I like to keep it in the family, but it'll be a nice, interesting chat for her as somebody who loves reptiles. So we'll put all that in the show notes. And also, given that we're starting this break of the show and there's going to be a pause, you can go and listen to more than 250 other episodes of the show. So, there should be enough content there to listen to until the show comes back. But thank you so much for joining me, Ben. It's been a delight to see you and your terrariums. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you're doing next. What are you doing next? More books, more
A lot more
videos,
more content. Yeah, more content. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's been a pleasure.
My only other request would be more of your mum. I watched a couple of videos with your mum in, like your mum's epic. I need more of your mum, please.
Yeah. Okay. Deal. Yeah, deal, and more content is to come.
And I'll report. I'm going to do that. I'm going to plant this in a terrarium, like give it loads of room around, and then I'll have to just see how long it takes.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be anything like you, but I'm going to give it a go with these saxifrages. And indeed, that's what I did with that. That dish started out the same way. It started out with all those plants as tiny plants. So I've kind of know how it works on a non-terrarium setting. So we'll do the same. But it's been wonderful, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jane.